February 2nd, 1996. Gunshots echoed through the halls of Frontier Middle School in Moses Lake, Washington. Inside a blood-stained classroom, a student with a rifle held his terrified classmates hostage until one brave teacher, John Lane, stepped in. These are school shooters who messed with the wrong school. May 25th, 2018. Students in a 7th grade science classroom in Indiana were horrified by a sharp crack of gunfire. Some hurried and dove under desks, others froze in shock, and a few began to cry. But at the front of the room, Jason Seaman stood just 15 feet away from the shooter, a 13-year-old student holding 2 handguns. Jason knew he couldn't freeze. He needed to protect his students, and that's exactly what he did. Jason Seaman was more than just a science teacher. At 29, he was a father of 2 young kids, a former college football player, and the kind of teacher students trusted without question. He always had that kind of calm confidence that reassured everyone around him. During school safety drills, Jason had once told his students, "If anything ever happens, I'll be the one standing between you and danger." But then again, drills are just drills. No one expects them to come true, or at least they hope they never do. That fateful morning, it all started with something small. The student had asked to leave the classroom, but when he came back, Jason was the first to notice that something was off. The boy wasn't carrying his backpack anymore, and his hoodie pockets looked heavy. And before Jason could react, the first shot rang out. Jason was shot in the abdomen, and another in the arm. Students scrambled for cover, and despite the excruciating pain, Jason kept his calm and did exactly what he had promised his students. His hand gripped the only thing nearby, a small basketball, and with every ounce of strength left in him, he hurled it at the boy. It was enough of a distraction. Jason lunged and tackled the shooter to the ground, locking his arms around him in a bear hug. The boy fired again as they struggled, but Jason's grip remained firm, refusing to let go. And while still wrestling with the boy, Jason shouted at his students, "Run! Get out of here! Call 911!" One by one, students ran out of the room. Jason then managed to disarm the boy, unload another weapon from his pocket, and pin him down until help arrived. The whole thing was over in less than 10 minutes. But those 10 minutes could have gone very differently if Jason hadn't made the choice to face danger head-on, saving lives and preventing a tragedy. Later, Jason was rushed to the hospital with 3 gunshot wounds. His injuries were serious, but thankfully he survived. So did Ella Whistler, a student who was hit by one of those bullets, as Jason struggled with the shooter. She endured multiple surgeries and faced months of therapy, but she pulled through. In the days that followed, the community rallied around Jason, calling him a hero and a lifesaver.
What do you think about the sacrifice Mr. Seaman made?
I don't really know. I have no words for it because it was such an amazing act of caring.
But Jason wasn't comfortable with that title. He simply said,
"Children were in need, so that's what I should have done, so that's what I did."
The shooter, too young to be tried as an adult under Indiana law, was sentenced to juvenile detention until he turned 18. In court, prosecutors revealed just how premeditated the attack was. His online searches were filled with references to infamous school shootings. He even recorded a chilling video the night before, addressed to his parents. 6 years later, Jason still teaches in that same classroom where it happened. Same desks, same walls, same door. But for Jason, that room isn't a reminder of violence. It's a symbol of survival, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a teacher and his students. September 20th, 2017. The cafeteria at Mattoon High School in Illinois was alive with the usual sounds of lunchtime chatter. But at 11:30 a.m., those happy, cheerful noises were replaced by gunshots. Right in the middle of the cafeteria, a student stood with a handgun. Chaos erupted as students and staff screamed and bolted toward the exits. But there would be one person moving toward the danger: Angela McQueen. Now, Angela wasn't a police officer or a security guard. She was a math teacher. But in that split second, she became something else entirely: a hero.
I really just wanted to have a positive impact on kids. I felt like that was what I was meant to do. And I feel like that even more now.
Angela McQueen had been teaching at Mattoon High School for over a decade. She'd always taken school safety drills seriously, even if she never truly believed she'd have to act on them. She would later say, "You never think it's going to happen where you are." But when she saw that shooter raise his gun and fire those first rounds, instinct took over. Angela jumped at the student, grabbed his arm, and forced it upward. Bullets flew into the ceiling as the gun discharged again. Students nearby scrambled to escape as Angela wrestled to keep the shooter's arm pointed away from the crowd, all while shouting to her students to run, get out, and stay low. And while Angela held on with everything she had, a school resource officer had arrived, stepped in to disarm and detain the student. In the aftermath, one student was found injured in the parking lot. Thankfully, they survived. Angela herself wasn't physically harmed, but the emotional weight of what just had happened would remain with her forever. When asked later about her actions, this is what Angela said.
And I immediately thought, oh crap, he's going to start shooting. So I immediately lunged at the gun, and I got the gun up in the air as quick as I could, as fast as I could, because I didn't want him to hit the students.
Her mother also said, "I don't think she gave it a thought, because when she saw the gun, I'm sure it was like, oh my goodness, we're not going to have another Sandy Hook." In the days that followed, Angela was treated as a hero. State police, city officials, and the school district honored her bravery. Her students left notes on her desk, hugged her, and will forever be grateful for the risk she took on for them. One student said, "She's like Chuck Norris." Years later, Angela remains a teacher at Mattoon High School, still teaching math, still showing up for her students every day. And while she doesn't like being called a hero, it's impossible to see her as anything else.
To me, it's almost like the mama bear instinct. I mean, I don't have kids of my own right now, but it's the instinct of, you're not going to do this to these are still my kids, even though I don't know every single kid in there.
February 23rd, 2010. Students at Deer Creek Middle School in Colorado poured out of the building, relieved that another day at school had just come to an end. But they didn't know what was waiting for them, or who. Out of nowhere, gunshots erupted and the students found themselves fighting for their lives. In the parking lot, kids screamed, scattered, and ducked behind cars. 2 students were already hit, and yet the shooter was still armed and moving, searching for more victims. But there was one man out there determined to put an end to the terror: David Benke. David wasn't just a math teacher. He was a father, a husband, and a coach who oversaw the school's track team. Known for his calm demeanor and steady leadership, he'd spent years guiding students both in the classroom and on the field. Yet he was never someone who sought out danger, but deep down, he had always known that if something terrible ever happened at his school, he wanted to be the one to step up.
And I promised my students that I would do something if anything like this ever happened.
That afternoon, David was on parking lot duty, making sure students got to their rides safely. At first, he thought the sound of gunshots were firecrackers, but then he saw the gunman, a man holding a high-powered rifle, and everything clicked into place.
At first, I just couldn't believe it. And then I saw him shoot towards the area where the students hang out.
David didn't hesitate. He moved quickly toward the shooter, who'd already injured 2 students, Regan Weber and Matt Thew. In one quick move, David tackled him, grabbed hold of the weapon, and wrestled him to the ground. During the struggle, the shooter managed to fire another round, but David didn't waver. He locked his arms around the gunman, pinning him down as another teacher arrived to help restrain him. When it was finally over and the shooter was taken into custody, he was identified as Bruco Strong Eagle Eastwood. The legal proceedings that followed revealed a deeply troubled man. Eastwood had a long history of mental health problems and had spoken about hearing voices. He was eventually found not guilty by reason of insanity and was committed to a psychiatric facility. As for David, of course, he was hailed a hero in the eyes of his community, though he didn't see himself that way. In an interview, he admitted, "It bugs me that he got another round off before I could stop him." But his students and their parents saw things differently. They knew David's quick actions had prevented what could have been a far worse tragedy. David Benke returned to teaching, back in his classroom where he belonged. remaining humble, refusing to let the word hero define him. And whenever someone asks him about that day, he simply says, "I'm just glad I was there." May 6th, 2021, just after 9 a.m. at Rigby Middle School in Idaho, math teacher Krista Gneiting was preparing her students for final exams when the sound of gunshots cut through the air. Krista peered into the hallway and felt her blood run cold. The school's janitor lay on the ground, motionless. But before she could fully comprehend what was happening, 2 more shots rang out. In an instant, Krista shut the classroom door, turned to her students, and said, "We're going to leave. We're going to run to the high school. You're going to run hard. You're not going to look back. And now is the time to get up and go." As her students hurried down the hall, Krista stayed behind. Somewhere nearby, a 6th grade girl was walking through the school with a handgun, firing at classmates and staff. 2 students and the janitor had already been hit, but the girl was still armed and refusing to back down. And that's when Krista made a decision. Instead of running away, she moved toward the sound of the shots. Krista had spent years guiding students through math problems and classroom challenges, but now she was facing something she never prepared for. While helping one of the wounded students, Krista spotted the shooter, a girl holding a gun in her trembling hands.
It was a little girl, and my brain couldn't quite grasp that. And so I looked at her and I just quietly said, "Are you the shooter?"
The girl didn't respond. Slowly, Krista placed her hand over the girl's hand, the one clutching the gun, and gently slid the weapon out of the girl's grip. The girl didn't fight back. She just stood there. But Krista didn't stop at disarming her. She pulls the girl into a hug and holds her close.
Because I thought, this little girl has a mom somewhere that doesn't realize she's having a breakdown and she's hurting people.
As she held the girl, Krista whispered words of comfort. She told her that it was going to be okay and that they were going to get through this together. And slowly, the girl began to calm down. By the time police arrived, Krista gently explained to her, "He needs to put you in handcuffs now." The girl didn't resist. She let the officer cuff her and guide her to the police car. In the days that followed, Rigby Middle School became a national story. Parents and students hailed Krista not just for her bravery, but for her compassion. She had disarmed an active shooter not with force, but with kindness. The legal system took over from there. The girl, whose name was never publicly released, was taken into custody. Prosecutors revealed that she had brought the handgun from home and carried out that attack deliberately. The specific charges were kept sealed under Idaho law. Krista, however, wasn't focused on punishment. She spoke openly about the girl's need for help and support. Krista said, "She's just barely starting in life and she just needs some help. Everybody makes mistakes. I think we need to make sure we get her help and get her back to a place where she loves herself so she can function in society." May 17th, 2019 was a regular Friday morning at Park Rose High School in Oregon when Keanon Lowe walked into a classroom looking for a student. Moments later, an 18-year-old student named Angel Granados Diaz entered the room wearing a black trench coat and clutching a shotgun. Time seemed to freeze for everyone, but instead of panicking, Keanon made a fateful decision. Keanon Lowe was a football and track coach, a mentor, and someone who cared deeply about the students he worked with every day. Now before that, Keanon was a former wide receiver for the University of Oregon Ducks and had once dreamed of a career in pro football. But after the death of his best friend, Taylor Martinick, from an opioid overdose, Keanon felt a pull to return home to Oregon. That's when he left his role as the NFL offensive analyst and dedicated himself to coaching at Park Rose High School, where he didn't just teach football plays, but also resilience, discipline, and compassion. So that morning, when Keanon saw Angel walk into the classroom with a shotgun, he acted on instinct. He lunged forward, grabbed the weapon with both hands, and wrestled it away. But what happened next was something not even the shooter saw coming. After being subdued, Angel broke down in tears and said, "Nobody cares about me."
He broke down, and I just wanted to let him know that I was there for him. I told him I was there to save him. I was there for a reason, and that, this is a life worth living.
With the gun safely handed to another staff member, Keanon wrapped his arms around Angel and held him close. Angel sobbed in Keanon's arms while students watched the unbelievable moment, which was raw and deeply human. And when the police arrived, Angel didn't resist and allowed himself to be taken into custody peacefully.
I felt compassion for him. And a lot of times, especially when you're young, you don't realize what you're doing until it's over.
In the aftermath, it was discovered that Angel had come to school that day planning to take his own life. The shotgun he carried was loaded with a single shell, and according to prosecutors, he had no intention of harming anyone else. Angel was eventually sentenced to 3 years of probation and mandated to receive a mental health treatment. For Keanon, the encounter wasn't just about disarming that student. It was about seeing a person in pain and offering him some compassion. Keanon said, "The relief came from the fact that no shots were fired and nobody was hurt. But the pain came from seeing a young man who felt like he had no other way out." Following the incident, Keanon Lowe found himself a national hero overnight. The security footage of him disarming Angel and then hugging him went viral, capturing hearts around the world. But Keanon remained humble, reflecting on the moment as something far more significant than heroism. He said, "There are just some things in life you can't explain, and that's one of them. It's almost like a miracle how the timing worked out." Today, Keanon continues to inspire others with his story. He's written a memoir titled Hometown Victory, sharing not just the events of that day, but the life experiences that led him to that moment that ended up saving not only the terrified students, but Angel himself. January 10th, 2013, the peace and quiet of Taft Union High School in California was shattered by the sound of a shotgun blast. A 16-year-old student had entered a second-floor classroom and pulled the trigger. Throughout the chaos, one man would remain calm and collected: Ryan Heber. Everyone was taken by surprise when the shooter entered Ryan's classroom and aimed at the student he claimed had been bullying him. He then fired more shots at students trying to escape. Ryan then did the only thing he felt was right. He stepped forward, placing himself between the shooter and the remaining students, and told him, "You don't have to do this. Put the gun down." The shooter paused, unsure of what to do next. And Ryan, despite the fear growing inside him, continued to speak calmly, allowing more and more students to escape through the back door. The boy then tried to threaten Ryan, telling him, "I don't want to shoot you." But Ryan stood his ground, moved even closer, and kept trying to reason with the shooter. Just then, campus supervisor Kim Lee Fields arrived and stood by Ryan's side. Together, they managed to convince the shooter to lower the shotgun and hand it over. Thankfully, no lives were lost. When authorities arrived, the shooter was taken into custody. Investigators later discovered he had brought up to 20 shotgun rounds and had seemed prepared for prolonged violence. The student who was shot survived, but his injuries were serious and required surgery. Another student suffered hearing damage, and a girl was injured while trying to escape. Further legal proceedings revealed more about the shooter. Classmates shared stories of him being bullied, mocked for his appearance, and carrying deep emotional wounds. He was ultimately charged with attempted murder. Ryan, meanwhile, returned to teaching, back to the classroom where it all happened. He carried a faint scar on his forehead from a stray pellet, a quiet reminder of the events of that day and the choice he made. His students won't forget that either. To them, Ryan wasn't just a teacher that day. He was their protector. His calm courage in the face of danger ensured that more lives weren't lost and that a desperate situation didn't have to spiral into something far worse. August 20th, 2013, an armed man walks into the school's office of Ronald E. McNair Discovery Learning Academy in Georgia with an AK-47 in his hands and over 500 rounds of ammo in his bag. The man began shooting, sending the entire school into a frenzy. The school went into lockdown and fear spread like wildfire. But amidst the panic, Antoinette Tuff, a school bookkeeper working at the front desk that summer day, decided she'd be the one to take action. Antoinette Tuff was a mother, a woman of deep faith, and someone who had faced many hardships of her own, such as a painful divorce, the challenges of raising a disabled son, and even her own moments of despair, including a past attempt to take her own life. But despite it all, Antoinette was also someone who believed in compassion. And on that August morning, it was compassion that saved an entire school. Out of nowhere, the gunman, who was later identified as Michael Brandon Hill, stormed into the office looking all agitated and unstable. He started firing shots into the floor and made it crystal clear that he wanted a confrontation with the police.
He said to tell them to back off. He doesn't want the kids. He wants the police. So back off and
But instead of panicking, Antoinette stayed calm. With a 911 dispatcher on the line, she began talking to Michael, calming him down.
I can help you. Let me talk to them and let's see if we can work it out so that you don't have to go away with them for a long time. It's going to be all right, sweetie. I just want you to know that I love you, though, okay? And I'm proud of you. That's a good thing that you've just given up.
But in those tense moments, Antoinette didn't just talk. She also listened, as if Michael had just been waiting for someone to show him compassion. He began sharing his pain, his struggles, and his fears. And to bridge the gap between them, Antoinette opened up about her own life as well, her vulnerabilities, her heartbreak, and the challenges she'd overcome. She told him,
I thought the same thing, you know. I tried to commit suicide after my husband left me. But look at me now. I'm still here, still working, and everything's okay.
Her words reached him. Slowly, Michael began lowering his weapon. Antoinette assured him that surrendering was the right choice, that he could still find help, and that his life still had value. Michael thankfully listened to her and laid down the weapon. Antoinette then directed him on how to empty his pockets, where to place his gun, and how to lie on the floor until the police arrived. When law enforcement finally entered the school, no one was hurt. Not a single student, teacher, or staff member had been harmed, and all thanks to the bravery of one woman. In the aftermath, the world learned more about Michael Brandon Hill. He was a deeply troubled man with a history of mental health problems and a prior arrest for making terroristic threats. He was later charged with multiple felonies, including aggravated assault, terroristic threatening, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. In the years that followed this incident, Antoinette wrote a memoir titled Prepared for a Purpose, sharing her story with the world. She became an advocate for mental health awareness and a motivational speaker, reminding people everywhere of the power of empathy and the strength of love in the face of fear. She later admitted in this interview, "I was terrified, but I couldn't focus on that. All I could see was that young man and how we were all going to get home safely." December 1st, 1997. As students arrive at Heath High School in Paducah, Kentucky, the halls were filled with laughter, and the day seemed to be unfolding like any other typical school day. But all that changed in an instant. Sharp, deafening gunshots tore through the air as 14-year-old Michael Carneal opened fire on a group of students gathered for morning prayer. In the middle of all of this was Principal Bill Bond. Now, Bill Bond wasn't the kind of principal who ruled from behind a desk. He was the type who knew students by name, made sure each kid felt like they mattered, and spent years fostering an environment where they felt seen, supported, and valued. But that morning, the familiar halls of his school became something unrecognizable, and while students scattered and teachers pulled others to safety, Bill didn't hesitate. He marched toward the gunfire. He knew he had to. Bill slowly approached Michael, who had stopped shooting but was still holding the pistol. The boy had already fired 8 rounds, killing 3 girls, Nicole Hadley, Jessica James, and Casey Steger, and injuring 5 others. But when Michael saw the damage he had done, he placed the pistol on the ground. Bill calmly stepped forward toward the boy. Michael surrendered without resistance, and Bill carefully secured the weapon. In the aftermath, investigators uncovered the truth behind Michael Carneal. On paper, he was an average student, no major behavioral issues, decent grades, and nothing that would raise alarm. But beneath that surface was a heavy weight he'd been carrying for far too long. Michael often tried to find his place amongst his peers, bringing items to school to sell in hopes of making connections. Sometimes he resorted to stealing, desperate for acceptance and friendship. But his small size and physical weakness made him an easy target, and the bullying never seemed to stop. Things would worsen when this gossip column in a middle school newspaper exposed private details about his feelings for another male student. The relentless name-calling and mockery that followed only deepened his sense of isolation and fed a growing bitterness. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, Michael's actions grew more concerning. He stole a .38 handgun from his parents' room, intending to sell it at school. But when this other student took the gun from him and threatened to report him to authorities, the humiliation and powerlessness he felt became yet another weight on his already heavy shoulders. Around this same time, Michael began dropping cryptic hints, telling classmates,
Something big's gonna happen.
but no one took him seriously. They brushed it off as empty words, not realizing how close those words were to becoming a devastating reality. Michael was later charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. December 1998, he was given 3 concurrent life sentences, along with an additional 120 years for attempted murders and burglary. He tried applying for parole after serving 25 years, but his request was unanimously denied in 2022. Under Kentucky law, this effectively turned his life with parole sentence into life without it. As for Bill Bond, the events of that day were permanently carved into his memory. Bill had spent the following years traveling the country, speaking to educators, principals, and law enforcement about school safety and crisis response. He became an advocate for preparedness, sharing his experience to help prevent similar tragedies. He carried the weight of Heath High School's loss, but he also carried its resilience. He once said,
The teachers that were there were committed to those kids, and the kids were committed to each other. No one walked away.
Today, Bill's retired, but the memory of that day is still with him. A basket of letters, cards, and newspaper clippings sit in his closet, unopened but never discarded, because he believes that some stories, no matter how heavy, deserve to be carried. February 27, 2012. A chilling incident takes place at Chardon High School in Ohio. A student named TJ Lane enters the cafeteria, catching everyone's attention. His sweatshirt had the word killer crudely written across the front, and in his hand, a gun. But before anyone could react, he began shooting. The chaos erupted instantly, with students screaming and desperately seeking shelter under tables and rushing toward the exits. Lane moved with unwavering determination, targeting anyone in his path. Tragically, 3 students, namely Daniel Parmitter, Demetrius Hewlin, and Russell King Jr., lost their lives in this horrific accident, while 3 others sustained injuries. But with everyone going haywire, Coach Frank Hall went right for the danger, determined to stop anyone else from getting hurt. When the gunshots echoed, Frank didn't hesitate. He charged toward Lane, shouting at him to stop. Lane turned, saw the coach coming for him, and bolted. Frank pursued him down the hallways, through the doors, and out into the cold February air. Feeling concerned, Lane eventually discarded the gun and surrendered. But Frank didn't stop there. After securing Lane, he turned back and re-entered the cafeteria and walked into a scene of devastation. Students huddled together, trembling, some crying silently, others frozen in shock. Frank moved from one injured student to the next, offering comfort, pressing his hands to wounds, and standing by their side until paramedics and police arrived. In the days following the shooting, investigators pieced together the troubled life of TJ Lane. Now, Lane had a deeply unstable childhood. His dad had spent a lot of time in prison, mostly for hurting women, including Lane's mom, who also faced legal problems of her own, causing him to lose custody of Lane, which forced him to reside with his grandparents. As for Lane himself, he was described by some as quiet and polite. Yet when no one was looking, he had a hidden darkness. Just months before the attack, he posted a haunting message on Facebook.
I am death, and you have always been the sod. Now, feel death. Not just mocking you, not just stalking you, But inside of you, die, all of you.
And while it may have raised a few eyebrows, no one could have predicted the tragedy that would happen next. Lane was later tried and sentenced to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. And at his sentencing, he would show no remorse, wearing a white t-shirt with the word killer scribbled across it. He mocked the victims' families, seeing his image as a symbol of cruelty and pure evil.
Saying to pull the trigger to kill your sons, your basic memory. Love you.
Meanwhile, Frank Hall became a symbol of courage and selflessness. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Frank turned his grief into purpose. He became an advocate for school safety, speaking across the country at conferences and partnering with organizations like the Sandy Hook Promise Foundation. He didn't just talk about what happened, he talked about what could be done to prevent it from happening again. When asked about that day, Frank doesn't dwell on his own actions. Instead, his thoughts always drift back to the students he couldn't save.
I don't know why this happened. I only wish I could have done more. I'm not a hero. Just a football coach and a study hall teacher.
Years later, Frank Hall remains a steady presence in his community. He returned to Chardon High School, continuing to guide and mentor students, carrying the weight of that day with quiet resilience. To the world, Coach Frank Hall is a hero. But to him, he was simply doing what he believed was right, showing up, standing firm, and protecting his kids. February 2nd, 1996. It was an ordinary day at Frontier Middle School in Moses Lake, Washington. But that ordinary day shattered the moment 14-year-old Barry Lukatis walked into his algebra classroom, dressed like a Wild West gunslinger. Under his black duster coat, he carried 2 pistols and a high-powered hunting rifle. What followed was a scene of unimaginable violence. Barry opened fire without hesitation, killing his teacher, Leona Carries, as she stood at the front of the chalkboard, still holding onto her eraser. 2 students, Arnold Fritz and Manuel Vela Jr., were also shot and killed, while another student, Natalie Hintz, was critically injured. Amid the chaos, John Lane, a teacher and wrestling coach, heard the gunshots. Without hesitation, he sprints down the hallway and bursts into the algebra classroom. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air, and the sight before him was one of pure horror. John quickly realized the severity of the situation. He couldn't act recklessly. One wrong move could cost more lives. So he said,
"Barry, you don't have to do this."
Barry, still holding onto his rifle, pointed it towards John and started threatening him. But John didn't let the fear take over him, and he began to negotiate with Barry, asking to take the injured Natalie Hintz out of the classroom. Barry refused at first, telling John to let the injured student die. But John persisted, and eventually, Barry agreed. John managed to drag Natalie out of the classroom, slipping on the blood-soaked floor as he did so. But he didn't stop there, because he went back into the classroom again and again, each time risking his life to try and de-escalate the situation and free as many students as he could. At one point, Barry told John he wanted to just end it all and began preparing to take a hostage to escape. John volunteered as the hostage, and Barry kept him at gunpoint with his rifle. But then, John saw an opening, and in a split second, he lunged forward, grabbed the rifle, and pinned Barry against the wall. The students in the room wasted no time and escaped into the hallway, while John held Barry there until police arrived. In the aftermath, investigators uncovered a troubled home life behind Barry Lukatis. He had a fractured family, and his mother often spoke to him about killing herself. She even suggested that they both end their lives together on Valentine's Day of 1996. Many would wonder if it was this home environment that pushed Barry over the edge, but Barry later himself would say it was the relentless bullying at school and his struggles with clinical depression that were truly leading to his violent outbursts. September 1997. Barry was tried and convicted of 2 counts of aggravated first-degree murder and sentenced to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole. Years later, following a Supreme Court ruling on juvenile sentencing, Barry returned to court for resentencing. For the first time, he publicly apologized for his actions.
None of you should have had to go through that. And it was because I was stupid, and because I was pathetic, and because I was weak.
But despite this, his sentence was upheld, and he was given 189 years in prison. As for John Lane, he never considered himself a hero either. He simply said,
I couldn't have lived with myself if I didn't do something.
but to the students he saved, to their families, and to the entire Moses Lake community, John Lane will always be remembered as the teacher who stepped into chaos, faced unthinkable danger, and saved countless lives. John continued his work in education for many years after the incident and became a voice in the national conversation about school safety and community support. His message was always clear. We must care for one another, pay attention to those who are struggling, and never underestimate the power of compassion in the face of darkness.